A thin morning fog rested quietly over the cemetery grass. The world felt still, almost as if time itself had slowed to listen. A tall man in a dark suit knelt before a small gray headstone. His shoulders trembled with the kind of grief that only fathers understand. His name was Victor Langston, 58 years old, a billionaire known across the country for his powerful companies and sharp mind. But here, in this quiet place, none of that mattered. Here he was only a father. Victor pressed both hands against the stone, his forehead touching the cold surface. The picture of a smiling little girl was carved into the marble. She had bright eyes and soft curls, forever frozen in childhood. His daughter Lily. Victor's voice came out low and broken. My little girl. Daddy is sorry. For 5 years he had visited this grave. Every month. Sometimes every week. The business world believed Victor Langston had become colder after his daughter's death. They said the tragedy hardened him. But the truth was simpler. A father's heart had never healed. The wind moved slowly through the trees as he spoke again. I should have protected you. I should have been there. Behind him, a small pair of shoes stepped carefully along the gravel path. A young boy stood there watching. He looked about 8 years old. His skin was deep brown and warm like polished wood. He wore worn clothes, a soft brown shirt and loose pants that had been patched more than once. A flat cap rested on his head. His name was Elijah Brooks. Elijah had come to the cemetery with his grandmother earlier that morning. She was tending another grave nearby. But the boy's attention had drifted toward the grieving man kneeling before the headstone. Children often notice pain that adults try to hide. Elijah watched the men cry for a long quiet moment. Then something in the boy's heart stirred. Slowly he walked closer. Victor did not notice at first. His eyes were closed as tears rolled down his face. Then a small voice spoke gently behind him. Mister. Victor turned slightly, surprised. The boy stood there pointing toward the stone. Elijah's voice was soft but steady. Your daughter isn't dead, it's your wife who lied to you. The words hung in the foggy air like a sudden bell ringing in a silent church. Victor froze. For a moment he thought he had heard wrong. His tired eyes studied the boy. What did you say? Elijah stepped closer. His expression carried the simple honesty that children sometimes have before the world teaches them to doubt themselves. I said your daughter isn't dead. Victor's chest tightened. That's not something you joke about, son. I'm not joking. Victor slowly stood up. His tall frame towered above the boy, but his voice remained quiet. How could you possibly know anything about my daughter? Elijah hesitated for a moment. He glanced around the cemetery as if remembering something important. My grandma used to work at the hospital, the one near the river. Victor felt a strange chill. That hospital had closed years ago. It was the same hospital where his daughter was supposedly declared dead after a sudden illness. Elijah continued. She told me about a rich man's daughter a long time ago, said something strange happened that night. Victor's heartbeat slowly grew louder in his ears. What kind of strange? Elijah took a slow breath. His voice remained calm. My grandma said the baby was still breathing, but someone paid a lot of money to say she wasn't. The cemetery suddenly felt colder. Victor's mind raced back through painful memories. That night. The doctor speaking quietly. His wife Margaret crying beside him. The rushed paperwork. The small closed casket. Back then he had been too broken to question anything. Victor knelt down again so he could look the boy in the eyes. Son, what is your grandma's name? Gloria Brooks. Victor's breath caught in his throat. He remembered the name. Gloria had been a nurse working the night shift that evening. But according to hospital records she had left her job suddenly just days after the incident. Victor felt the ground beneath his world begin to shift. Elijah, is your grandmother here today? The boy nodded and pointed across the cemetery. Near a large oak tree, an elderly black woman stood quietly arranging flowers on another grave. Victor stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood slowly. His voice was barely more than a whisper. Would you take me to her? Elijah nodded. Together they walked across the grass. The fog had begun to lift slightly, letting soft sunlight filter through the branches above them. Gloria Brooks looked up as they approached. Her eyes studied Victor carefully. She was nearly 70 years old, her hair silver, her face lined with years of quiet strength. "Elijah," she said gently, "who is your friend?" The boy looked up at Victor. "This is the man whose daughter you told me about." Gloria froze. Her eyes slowly returned to Victor's face. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then she sighed deeply. "I wondered if this day might come." Victor's voice trembled slightly. "My daughter Lily, the hospital said she died." Gloria shook her head slowly. "No sir, she didn't." The words felt like thunder rolling across Victor's heart. Gloria sat down on a nearby bench and motioned for him to sit as well. "Back then I was just a nurse doing night rounds. The baby had been sick but she was alive when I checked on her." Victor listened with every nerve in his body. Gloria continued carefully. "But later that night I saw your wife speaking with one of the hospital administrators. They thought no one was watching." Victor's hands tightened. They handed him an envelope. And afterward, the doctor came into the nursery and signed the death certificate. Victor felt his world tilt. "Why would my wife do something like that?" Gloria's voice softened. "I believe she wanted control of your fortune. If the child was gone, everything would belong to her." Victor closed his eyes. Years of quiet suspicion suddenly returned to the surface. Margaret had divorced him not long after Lily's death and taken a large settlement. He had assumed grief destroyed their marriage. Now another possibility stood before him. Victor whispered slowly. "Do you know where my daughter is now?" Gloria nodded gently. "I do." Victor's breath caught again. Margaret gave the baby to a private adoption group that night. Silence filled the space between them. Elijah stood quietly beside his grandmother. Victor looked at the boy. "You told me the truth, even though you didn't know me." Elijah shrugged softly. "My grandma says truth is like sunlight, it belongs to everyone." Victor smiled faintly for the first time in years. Sometimes wisdom comes from the smallest voices. Over the next weeks Victor began a careful search. Old hospital records were reopened. Adoption agencies were contacted. Lawyers followed quiet trails that had been buried for decades. And one calm autumn afternoon, the answer finally came. A woman named Hannah Carter. 30 years old. Living only 2 states away. Victor sat quietly holding the report in his office. His daughter had lived an entire life without him. But she had lived. That truth alone felt like a second chance from heaven. A few weeks later Victor stood outside a small coffee shop in a quiet town. His heart beat like a young man again. Inside the window he saw her. A woman with bright eyes and soft curls. The same smile that once shined from the marble photograph in the cemetery. Victor stepped inside slowly. Their eyes met. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Hannah smiled gently. "I think, you might be my father." Victor nodded slowly as tears returned to his eyes. "Yes. I believe I am." Outside the cafe the afternoon sun warmed the street. Life had come full circle in the most unexpected way. Weeks later Victor returned to the cemetery once more. But this time he did not come alone. Beside him stood Hannah. And nearby stood Elijah and Gloria. Victor looked down at the old headstone. He placed his hand on it softly. "This stone held my sorrow for years, but today it holds something different." He looked at Elijah. "Hope." Elijah smiled shyly. Victor turned to the camera of life that always seems to be watching our stories unfold. And he spoke gently. Sometimes truth comes from the most unexpected voices. Sometimes wisdom arrives through the courage of a child. Here on the Black Voices we believe every human story carries a lesson worth sharing. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell us where you are listening from. Your voice is part of the Black Voices family. And remember, kindness, truth, and courage can change a life even on the quietest morning in a forgotten cemetery.